On this edition of the program, Trump's 100th day in office is fast approaching. What's the best word to describe it? We welcome our friend, Gabe Fleisher, from Wake Up to Politics, back to the show to discuss that and so much more. It's all coming up.
The following is brought to you by Just Another Pilot.
Hello and welcome everybody to the Politics program for April 18th, 2025. Your old pal Justin Robert Young joining you here in Austin, Texas. We're going to talk all about Trump's first 100 days, and we go through a lot in this episode with Gabe Fleisher. But before we do that, I'm going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to plug our Substack early, mostly because I think that there's a good episode if you are very interested in the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case. That is the man from Maryland to some, MS-13 gangbanger to others. There is no question that he was sent to El Salvador after the government had determined that he should be sent anywhere but El Salvador. But I say that we have a Substack episode up about that yesterday. That was our Thursday episode. Talked a lot about where I think the Democrats might be getting over their skis with this one. And the reason why I bring that up is because if you did listen to that, then I'm going to go ahead and also encourage you to read Gabe Fleisher's latest Wake Up to Politics. That would be for Thursday. He wrote a whole thing, which I think, for my money, is the most sober listing of the facts in that case, which, for my money, has gotten way out of control in terms of the hyperbole. There's a lot of things that are being said about that case, specifically whether or not he was listed to be deported, whether or not there is any evidence to show that he is an MS-13 gang member. A lot of stuff that's kind of out there that's said very, very, very confidently by, I think, otherwise really smart people. It's just a good read. So we didn't talk about that in this episode because we recorded it earlier in the week, but I thought Gabe did a great job. A big shout out to him. Go ahead and read that. But this is mostly about the first 100 days. So let's go ahead and get to it right now. Welcoming back to the show, Wake Up to Politics' own Gabe Fleisher. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing good. How are you, Justin?
Oh, man. I want to do a 100-day heat check for the White House, because we're about at the point where reporters and writers across the political spectrum they're starting to write their drafts about the first 100 days and what it's going to be. So I wanted to do something as those start to flow out, because I know it's the most something, but it's like, and you know this because you write a daily newsletter. I'm sure that you get a lot of feedback on that, not only through people emailing you, but also comments and stuff on Substack. But it's like certain words trigger people. So you could say like the most action packed. People wouldn't be all that upset, or maybe they would be like, no, you didn't say the most corrupt or the most accomplished in 100 days. There's a lot of ways that you can look at it. The most blank. How do you fill that in?
I'll go most aggressive. And I think most aggressive first 100 days, I'd say probably right up there with FDR's. I think, which I think is maybe something some people would take offense at, but frankly, I don't know that the Trump administration would shy away.
No, I think that they would be
very
pumped by
proud
that.
of that aggression. I mean, certainly if you look at the sheer number of executive orders, it by far outpaces any other first 100 days. It outpaces some first years in terms of numbers of executive orders, but not just obviously, I think it's beyond sheer numbers and sheer volume. It's in what they've tried to do with those executive orders, really pushing the boundaries of American law in kind of several places. And then obviously, as we're seeing this week too, pushing the boundary of complying with court orders, and kind of in kind of their, and frankly, in their relations with both of the other branches of government, I think being more aggressive than any other administration in terms of trying to kind of do things without congressional oversight, and then potentially also doing things despite court orders. So I would say most aggressive first 100 days.
Aggressive is a great way to put it. Because one of the things that happened in the intervening 8 years between Donald Trump's election in 2016 and when he got back into the White House was a lot of people on social media and in the conservative commentariat sphere that had takes such as, well, I don't know why they did this their first 4 years. Mm-hmm. Don't you see that by the letter of the law, there's one weird trick where you could just do that? Mm-hmm. And the one thing that I will say about this first 100 days is they've done all of the that's. I don't think that there's a lot of people. There are people, obviously, that disagree from a partisan perspective with Trump. There's people that disagree with Trump from the same side of the aisle on certain elements of what he has done. But there's not a lot of big-brained people that are saying, well, I don't know why they did it this way. They should just do it that way. All of the that ways have been taken this time.
Pretty much. And I think that's the reflection of a lot of planning. And I think the first Trump administration, almost no planning went into. And I think, most famously, to the extent there was planning, it was kind of Chris Christie's binders that Trump literally threw away, according to Christie, in the kind of period before his first inauguration during that transition. This time they had a 4-year transition, essentially, 4-year planning period. Obviously, the most famous kind of product out of that is Project 2025. Yeah. I think you could argue, obviously, there's pieces of that haven't implemented, pieces of that plan that haven't. I think never will be, but obviously a lot of people from the administration that were part of that. But no matter what, I think that reflects the fact that not just Project 2025, but a number of conservative groups and a number of people who are now in the Trump administration spent a lot of time really thinking through. A lot of them, in the Trump included, were not satisfied with how the first term went, felt that he was really hemmed in a lot of places, and a lot of his key priorities were just never implemented. And I think they were determined to if they were going to get a second chance, they would never let that happen again. And yes, certainly they fulfilled that. And certainly, like you say, any kind of nook and cranny in the law that allows them to do it. Again. They've done it. Now we're going to see, that's kind of the first 100 days. The next phase is, the judicial process is a lot slower than kind of the administrative process in the executive branch. So now we'll see in the kind of next 100 days after that, how much of those types of legal interpretations that conservative lawyers have spent the last few years kind of trying to pore over will actually be accepted by, in many cases, conservative judges, some of whom, appointees of Trump's from the first term, who have already kind of said, no, that's not going to fly. And in other cases,
we've already seen the ping pong of respect the judges back and forth, because we started this Trump administration with a lot of skepticism toward the judiciary from the left. And then we saw a big pivot toward, no, respect the judges, rule of law, comply with the court orders. And then you get some Supreme Court decisions that go against their way. And then it's like, well, I don't know, maybe the judiciary is just rubber stamping everything. Let me give you another word. Consequential. And I will put it on two things. Number one, my entire adult life, and really all of my life just in general, there have been a few things that have just been known. You can't fire federal employees en masse, for example. You can't just totally reorder the financial aid system. You can't do any of the number of things. You can't, part of the reason why people have always soft pedaled things like deportations, or we've had a Swiss cheese version of enforcing immigration laws, are because these things are just, you can't be done. Like they're too complicated. They're too messy. They're going to damage your point of view. And that's before we even get into the tariffs. What I'm curious about is when we look back on this historically, it will obviously be with the understanding of whether or not A, these things were popular enough for the Republicans to get reelected in 2028. And B, if the next Democratic candidate that comes in that does win the White House, how much they undo of what has been done. And I don't know if anyone will have the capital to rehire everybody that was fired from the federal workforce. I don't know if anyone, I mean, at least we saw with Biden when Trump put a bunch of tariffs on China, Biden left the vast majority of them on. So it's like, I don't know if there is a rubber band snapback from what has happened in these first 100 days, let alone what happens for the rest of this term.
I mean, I think, something I hear from my readers a lot, I guess you're kind of bouncing off the kind of Project 2025 point is, where's the Democrats' Project 2029? And I think kind of the best response to that is, Project 2025 didn't emerge until much later into Biden's first term. So I think there's still time for Democrats to kind of come up with something like that. But I also think more fundamentally is this kind of divide within the party that I think we're going to see in the next few years is that I think there will be a segment of the party that will want as much as possible to go back to normal. The response to Trump 2.0 will be to go back to normal and to kind of try to reset everything and try to go back. And then I think you'll see another segment of Democrats that will say, no, like all these precedents that Trump set, we don't like what he did with them. We don't like freezing federal funding when it comes to education funds or anything like that. But let's go freeze defense funding. Let's go, anything he's done, let's do 10 times harder, but in the policy areas that we want. And I think at this point, it's unclear which kind of way the Democratic Party will go with that. I think, the Biden era is interesting because there were efforts on the part of some congressional Democrats to kind of take what happened during Trump's first term and rein in executive power. And at several points, they were stopped by the White House for kind of the obvious reason that no president wants to take away their own power. But I mean, you can imagine, and as you said, Biden obviously kept in some of Trump's tariffs, but probably the ones that would have been approved by Congress anyways. You can imagine what might have happened if they took kind of that 4-year period where Republicans are working with them on the CHIPS Act and the Infrastructure Bill and even kind of the Electoral Count Act and kind of put in the exact bill they're talking about now with tariffs to kind of take away presidential authority on tariffs, give it back to Congress. And I think that probably might have gotten more than 60 votes in the Senate and probably could have passed under Biden.
Especially in the first 2 years. Yeah.
Right. But Democrats had no interest in doing that because that would have been taking power away from their own president. So that's going to be kind of the decision for the next Democratic president in power is whether they're willing, as kind of happened after the Nixon administration, which is kind of the heart of the origin of a lot of the kind of laws we have now, that to the extent there are kind of guardrails around presidential power, a lot of them stem from that period, whether to kind of do that again or to kind of continue down the road of what Mark Tushnet, who's a legal scholar, calls constitutional hardball and just kind of continue kind of ping-ponging back and forth with kind of escalating kind of, the aggression, kind of legal aggression. And I couldn't tell you which path the Democrats will take. I'll tell you most political parties generally don't take the side of ceding their own power.
They don't give up power unless it is politically advantageous to say, I will surrender power. That's really the only way that's going to happen. Here's the other big thing. I wonder whether or not this first 100 days is going to permanently affect campaigns because there, as again, in every other administration that I've seen, a lot of promises happen during the campaign. President gets inaugurated. And then like the first 100 days, it was usually to me looked at, now obviously as a big beefy executive order period right at the beginning, the day one EOs. But usually it was, all right, let's get our ducks in a row legislatively. We'll slam dunk the 2 or 3 things that we know we can do. Either it's bipartisan or there's enough soft will on the swing voters that you can make it happen. And then we'll tee up our budget and our big, policies, draw the blueprint of how that's going to happen. But not everything gets addressed that was on the campaign trail. And left, right, or center, I don't think anyone can disagree that Donald Trump has been extraordinarily aggressive with his campaign promises, which makes me wonder whether or not voters are going to look at things like authenticity and the believability of, they're actually going to do it from both sides of the aisle now differently going forward.
Well, I think the biggest disconnect in American campaigns has not always been, but for the last several decades at least, been the fact that, obviously we spent a lot of focus on the presidential campaign, and for good reason. It's the only time we kind of come together as a country and elect one person and kind of put all of our kind of faith and belief and policy into one person. And yet, for all the attention a presidential campaign receives, not only do presidents generally not do much, like you're saying, certainly not in the first 100 days, but they can't do much. And they're a much less powerful figure than I think most Americans believe them to be. And I think that's always kind of been this great disconnect. Now we're seeing Donald Trump, kind of push against that in certain ways using executive action, including, promises that, generations of Republican presidents have, promised, taking back foreign aid and repealing the Department of Education, and things that Republican president after Republican president have said they will do, but mostly never even tried to do because they know they can never get it through Congress. And now he is. But again, I'm hesitant to make any long-term kind of pronouncements while we're in this kind of provisional period where we've yet to see how much of those executive actions the courts will allow. And that's going to be the precedents that will be set for the next administration. That said, I am and for that reason, because executive actions are so by definition provisional, not only in that they only last for a presidency, but also, judges, especially if the Supreme Court hews to kind of the major questions doctrine and kind of the doctrine they've kind of laid in the last few years, have largely said, there's only so much presidents can do. To me, the real question is, does the Trump administration repeal the Senate filibuster? And if they don't, does it at least add pressure for the next Democratic president or next president to do so? And I think at some point in the next 20 years, that will go away. And at one level, that's, kind of one small rule in Senate procedures. And yet that is going to completely change how presidential campaigns are judged and how presidential terms are ranked and regarded, because suddenly it will become possible for a president to campaign on something and then actually do it. And I think until then, even although I agree with you, Trump has gone farther than most presidents in achieving a lot of his promises, because we still don't know how many of them will ultimately actually happen through the courts. That is going to be kind of the one thing that will eventually change, maybe kind of add somewhat of a, take what's been a disconnect in our politics and actually kind of make it more of a fluid connecting point of like, presidents promise something, and then if they have a congressional majority, they can actually do it. And I don't know if Trump is going to be the one to change that. He wanted to in his first term, but at some point, some president will, and suddenly a whole lot of policy action that's been kind of just, as you said, just known that presidents can't touch that, are going to flood onto the table, and I think really kind of reorder our politics.
And it's a very, very well-made point. What I think is part of just the general understanding of this administration is because the noise around everything that Donald Trump has been so loud, some out of proportion, some very much within proportion. The general expectation, again, from everybody is Donald Trump is doing everything he said.
Sure.
And the Democrats hope that that's a plus, because they'll be able to say, look, we warned you. He was saying everything he was going to do, and then he went and did it. The Republicans are like, look, promises made, promises kept. He even said that. That was another catchphrase of his. And indeed, he's doing it. But that means politically, it's going to be hard for Democrats to say, oh, you didn't do anything, like a lot of bluster, nothing really happened. What a fuddy-duddy, because they've already gone all in on dictator. They've already gone all in on king.
I agree, although I would note, I don't think, although I agree with you that there is normally this disconnect in that presidents don't actually achieve a lot of their campaign promises, I don't know if that's usually the subtext in which a lot of our campaigns are run. Like, I would say the Democratic argument after Trump's first term was that he was a highly consequential president and had done so much and had acted almost like a dictator and all these things. Even though by Republicans' own, Trump's own admission, a lot of that is a hard case to make considering how little he accomplished that he tried to do. But I think it's often, obviously, in a political opponent's interest to kind of hype up what their opponent is doing and make it sound more dramatic. So I think that has always been the case, even in response to fairly ineffective presidencies, that which I would say Trump's first term by some metrics was, but I don't think that was the popular imagination of that term either. So, I think that that's perhaps happened in other terms too. I agree with you. This one is much more consequential. We've seen as much more consequential, but I don't know. It's as if opponents treated the first one as not either.
Yeah. I think it's just more of an idea of like, this feels different. It feels different, not only because of the reaction to it, but just trying to watch it as dispassionately as possible, that like he has speed run so many of the elements, and really like to his currently political detriment in the polls, that it's like, hey, you know, you could have waited to get a few cycles in where it did seem like inflation was going down. You could get closer to your tax cuts, so these tariffs kind of seem more paired next to them and not a damaging element to the economy, that before you get everything else that's there. But it's all happened immediately. It's all happened, boom, 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 boom. So I don't know. I just don't know how America processes that. Or maybe America is not as focused on it. Maybe they're this is usually when people kind of check out, and it's just us nerds.
Yeah. Right. And my kind of gut is to say that I do think the first term was kind of processed as that too, as like so much chaos, so much going on. And that I think that was a lot of people's general kind of feeling of the
that was also corruption, right? Because that was so much of the Russia stuff. That was a lot of, firing Comey. It was the special counsel. Like there was a lot of things that were outside of the Oval Office, where now it's a lot of him signing papers and talking to the press.
Yeah. And I think another interesting thing about how this kind of first 100 days, will be thought of and kind of remembered in history is I do think you kind of use the word consequential, and I think that's absolutely right. I think if you look at kind of what might be other kind of contestants for very consequential first 100 days, it's always been in kind of the heat of some sort of crisis. And we had a president kind of come in responding to a crisis, and then you're like, of course, FDR's first 100 days after the Great Depression would be consequential. To the extent Barack Obama's first 100 days might be seen as consequential, you would kind of expect that coming in during the Great Recession. We obviously know that was, a big focus of his in the first 100 days of 2009. I think what will kind of be seen as this kind of historical anomaly of this term is it's unclear what exact crisis the Trump administration is responding to, and yet, enacting policy of great consequence on a number of areas. And I do think that, and I think that does speak to certainly the degree to which I think a lot of Americans do feel we're in a crisis in a lot of different ways, whether it's a immigration crisis or a crisis of crime or crisis of the economy or affordability, whatever it may be. A lot of people might feel it's in a crisis. I do think that's an interesting thing of how it might be received historically. Like, why will people think that Donald Trump was doing so many different things in so many different areas? If it's hard to kind of peg exactly what he was responding to? And then, I think as far as, the next campaigns, I think does hinge so much on what he'll be leaving. And, obviously, I think there was a week there where it seemed like maybe the tariffs would happen at such a broad base, and it was not impossible that the next campaign would be run in the heat of a recession, which, I think crises always give, each party, great excuses to do more and more. I mean, that's almost every one of Trump's most aggressive actions are kind of hinged on the idea that we're being invaded or we're at war, even. And I think a lot of it will hinge on, what kind of, bases, a future president might have to make that case, or whether we see, I think to your point, campaigns now, presidents will see it more and more in their interest to campaign as Trump did, kind of saying that America is in crisis and doing so much more poorly than it is, and other thing as a kind of way to really kind of hike up the executive actions that they try to do.
This is your update, brought to you by TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's where you go to support this show. We already did a pitch up front, so we'll keep this one short. 2 bonus episodes each and every week. That's where you need to go. TakePoliticsSeriously.com brings you to our Substack. Also got an annual plan. It's a good deal. Had a few signups on that this week, and I guarantee it, you're going to enjoy it. It's going to be a good time. Let's get to some of the stories we didn't get a chance to cover in this episode.
But at the end of the day, look, somebody calls me, I was saying it before, such a Western nationalism. I don't know if it is the right word, but I know that when I speak about West, mainly I don't speak about a geographical space. I speak about a civilization. And I want to make that civilization stronger. So I think even if we have some problems, okay, between the two shores of the Atlantic, it is the time that we try to sit down and find solutions. So I want to thank President Trump for having accepted an invitation to pay an official visit to Rome in the near future, and consider a possibility in that occasion to meet also with Europe. The goal for me is to make the West great again. Okay, and I think we can do it together.
We can.
That is Giorgia Meloni, the Italian prime minister, speaking with Donald Trump in the Oval Office. She was sent as part of the European Union's delegation to try to figure out a trade deal while we are within the 90-day pause of Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs, but didn't seem like he was moved. Big Chungus, he said that he was in no rush to finalize trade deals, claiming that tariffs are making the United States rich. During the meeting with Meloni, Trump downplayed concerns over the economic impact of tariffs and said other nations want deals more than he does. Despite Meloni's efforts, Trump stood firm on tariffs, though a bond market panic led him to temporarily lower the EU import taxes from 20% to 10%. Meloni promoted transatlantic unity. Trump's stance has created uncertainty in the market, especially when it comes to Europe. The EU does seek clarity amid rising strained tensions, economics, and divergent views on Ukraine and defense spending. So this is a strange question, right? Because the EU doesn't necessarily hold Giorgia Meloni in the highest regards. She was elected as a far-right representative. Real heads remember when she was compared to Mussolini in the American press. But now she is looked at as a Trump whisperer. Trump likes her. She was the only European Union head of state to come out for the inauguration. Trump has accepted a visit to Rome. But again, we get to these trade deals, which, in that Substack episode that I did, one of the things that I thought the Democrats should be doing more of is talking about small and medium businesses. Make small and medium businesses really, really famous right now, because if you dealt with China, and many of them do currently, they're in the lurch right now. Now, eventually, I think we're going to get a little bit more stability here, but I'm very curious to know what a trade deal with the European Union looks like, because the things that Donald Trump wants, more access into their markets, I think it's going to be a hard sell. Like, provincialism is a very, very deep ingrained part of European politics, and any political leader that makes a deal that is looked at as hurting the European interests, they might not be in that position for long. And also, Italy has a trade surplus with us, but a lot of it's because Americans just love buying Italian stuff. We love buying Italian foodstuffs. We love buying fashion, high-end fashion brands. There's just, we're not selling that back into Italy. What are we going to do? Make skinny jeans? I guess we do make skinny jeans. The United States Supreme Court will hear arguments on May 15, 2025 regarding President Trump's executive order aimed at ending birthright citizenship for children born in the United States to undocumented immigrants or those on temporary visas. While lower courts have blocked the order, citing violations of the 14th Amendment, the Supreme Court will focus on whether district judges have the authority to issue nationwide injunctions against presidential policies. A ruling in favor of the administration could allow partial enforcement of the order and set a precedent affecting the scope of judicial power over executive action. So this is not the ruling that I think some immigration, or this is not the case, the version of this that I think some immigration people have really, really wanted. They've been desperate to have the Supreme Court rule on the 14th Amendment. But it is probably a bigger case when it comes to a lot of these lower level courts blocking Trump policy. And that has been a consistent refrain from the Trump White House being like, wait a minute, since when does the judiciary have a veto power on the executive? But still, birthright citizenship, I mean, when we talk about permanent marks left by this administration, a redefinition of birthright citizenship to only be for citizens might be the biggest. It might be something that is bigger than anything else. And I don't know. I mean, you know, the assumption is that the 14th Amendment will be held up as including non-citizens, but you know, I don't know. I am not a great legal mind. We'll probably have to have somebody else on to, you know, get a better sense of this, but it just wouldn't shock me. The vibes from my point of view, it would not shock me if we got a ruling that was more along the lines of, no, this is only for citizens. Just saying. Finally, 2 people were killed and 6 hospitalized in a mass shooting at Florida State University on Thursday. The suspected shooter, a 20-year-old, reportedly is the son of the Leon County deputy. He was apprehended and hospitalized. Authorities believe he used his mother's handgun. Several campus buildings remain closed as an active crime scene, including the student union and classroom facilities. An emergency alert instructed students to shelter in place. Tallahassee Memorial Hospital is currently treating victims. FSU has canceled classes through Friday. President Trump has been briefed, and Governor Ron DeSantis expressed support for the FSU community. The investigation and law enforcement response remains ongoing. Obviously, a horrifying scene out there. Sounds like an intensely disturbed individual that did this. And so, you know, not much to say other than all of my thoughts and sympathies are with the FSU community. Not only is it a Florida school where many Floridians attend, it is also my mother's alma mater. The great Gloria Young attended Florida State University. So for all the Seminoles out there, you know, our thoughts and prayers are with you. That's it for our update. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That's where you go to support the show. And now back to Gabe Fleisher. You know, I'm on the final third of Chris Whipple's campaign book, Uncharted. Mm-hmm. And of the 3 that I've read, Fight, Revenge, and now Uncharted, this is obviously the one that is written from the most author-centric point of view, let's say euphemistically. You know, you can read the Amazon reviews that use bias as an example, but I think that as an author, he has the right to write it from whatever perspective he wants. And he's a television pundit that has a point of view. And so that is what it is. But he talks about being in the Madison Square Garden rally for Trump, and, you know, how everybody is talking about how much of a mess America is in. And he's kind of going almost right from the Kamala Harris rapid response playbook of like, they said that crime was up. In fact, crime was down. They said that manufacturing jobs had been decimated. In fact, there had been blah, 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 blah. But it really did illustrate to me something that you just brought up, where it's like, I think for, I don't know if a voting majority of the American public, but I would say probably more independents than Democrats would like to believe. If you ask them, is America in a crisis? They would say, yeah. And that's the one thing about this that I found hard to cover, is that on one hand, you have a very stable class of college educated people, for which I am a part of. Almost everybody in my social circle is a part of. All of my professional colleagues are a part of, where everything has been very stable, if not slightly growing, with pockets of turbulence. You know, a industry collapse here, you know, a recession there. There are industries that kind of blink in and out, but by and large, things have been very stable. But we're not the majority of the country. And when the political argument against Trump is, oh my God, he's being so chaotic. Oh my God, he's taking a hammer to all these institutions. You know, his approval ratings have declined, and we'll see whether or not he crosses that 40% mark. But I wouldn't be shocked if he does it, because I think that there's a lot of people that are like, good. I've been telling every pollster for the last 20 years that we're on the wrong track and that this is bad and that bad things are happening. And so is this the greatest thing, the greatest version of it? Maybe, maybe not, probably not. I don't know. I'll leave that up to somebody else, but I don't have a lot of sympathy to the machine that he's destroying.
And I agree with that completely. And I think that's why it was a mistake for Democrats to run so much in kind of pro-institution kind of messaging kind of in 2024.
But they're still doing it. Now he's the chaos guy. And it's like, how many times Jeb failed with chaos? Hillary failed with chaos. Kamala failed with chaos. How many times are we going to keep going back to chaos?
And I agree for the exact reason that you're talking about that. I think a lot of voters, want chaos, whether it's Bernie Sanders chaos or Donald Trump chaos. They want big change, radical change. I agree with all that. But I also think after the dust settles of that change, there will be the question of change to what end. And I think most voters do want to change, but why? Why do they think we're in such a crisis? Why do they want change? Well, they want change because they want lower prices. They want things to be more affordable. A lot of them want less political division. A lot of them want, certainly most of them want, Medicaid benefits if they have Medicaid, or want Social Security benefits if they're on Social Security. So all these things, and I think, which is what's so interesting, is to the extent Trump, I think, correctly diagnosed that a lot of Americans view us, we're in a crisis. I think there's one issue, immigration, on which he's acted aggressively, kind of right in accordance with what most people
want to be. Yes.
Right. And you see that in the polling. That's why if you ask approval on immigration, that's the issue that he still scores the best on. But for the rest of them, yes, he is causing chaos, which I do think a lot of voters want, but I think not necessarily to the end that a lot of voters want to achieve. The tariffs are chaos, and it's a big middle finger to the economists and the elite establishment and all that. And you might, be all fueled up by that, and you might even support the tariffs. And except for then if they happen and suddenly everything is more expensive and all the prices that Trump said would go lower are now higher, I don't know that suddenly that chaos won't look so good. I think they'll probably still want chaos, but not the chaos that Trump is offering. And they might, want much less government spending and a big middle finger to, the bureaucracy and the deep state and all that. But not if it cuts, benefits that they need to survive and to feed their families and all these things. So that's, I think, just what the disconnect that where I'm less convinced that the chaos will end up being so popular, because it does seem so like such a mismatch to the kind of outcomes that I think a lot of the voters want and expected from Trump, and that Trump promised. He promised to protect entitlements. We'll see if he holds to that promise. He promised to lower prices. We'll see if he holds to that promise. If he doesn't, I think much more than defending institutions or wanting them, triple down, Americans will be voting based on their own kind of economic outcomes, whether that is ones that
they always do,
supported or didn't. And that's kind of always what will dictate it. And it's just not clear that for all the chaos he's unleashing, that he's doing it certainly not in a focused way and not in a way that's kind of focused on the actual outcomes that people wanted and kind of put faith in him to kind of bring about.
I believe that the tariffs are an all-in moment for him, that everything that he has done, everything that he has worked toward, this is an all or nothing gambit, that if the economy tilts into a recession, especially if it's a meaningful one that moves into the midterms, this will be looked at strategically as one of the biggest Icarus moments in presidential political history. And on the other side, if we don't, and if all the Sturm und Drang and all the this is the sky is falling stuff doesn't come to pass, then I think this is quite possibly the biggest I told you so that he is going to have, that all the pointy-headed people were wrong and that Main Street had it right the entire time, and he was the person that brought that finally to the halls of power. What say you?
I agree with that in theory, and I would have said exactly that a week ago, or about a week ago, whenever before the kind of 90-day pause. Now it's clear to me, when it seemed like it genuinely seemed to me that he was ready to go all in. He was ready to spark a recession if that was what it was going to do, and was ready to kind of sustain that short-term pain, not just economic pain for Americans, but political pain for himself to kind of achieve this long-term end that he saw. And I agree with you. It seemed like this all-in moment. Now he isn't really going all in, so it's harder to judge. I think we're much more tipping towards a likelier outcome of having some tariffs, but they're much more limited. And then, prices might not go up so much, and he'll say, I told you so, prices didn't go up so much. But that's also because he'll have ended up implementing a much weaker and less kind of aggressive version of the tariffs.
Yeah,
and
but Yeah, but that's also, it's like, this is the problem with watching his own administration talk about this, is that you seem to have two very different arguments that were coming out of the White House. One that was like, yes, 30% tariffs on Germany tomorrow. Absolutely. Let's do it forever. That's the newest thing. We're going to make bratwurst in Michigan. That's all that's going to happen from now on. And then there was the other side that was like, well, instant, we have instant leverage now. This is the way to go about it. And that was the more Scott Bessent argument. I always, and this is, a week ago, it's funny, it feels like a month ago that happened, but it's like on last week's Wednesday episode, that was the argument that I made, is like, look, inside Trump, there are two wolves, things that he has said consistently for his entire life. Tariffs are good, and I'm the best deal man. I make the best deals. Yep. And ultimately, I think I'm the best deal man. I made the best deals kind of won out over hardcore tariffs now. But I think that's not inconsistent. Like, I understand your point of view that, like, yeah, I don't think there's much more to say other than he blinked on some of it. He even admitted himself that it was the bond market that really made him make a decision. But at the same time, the decision that he made, half his own cabinet thought he was going to make and was saying he was going to make.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it's only contradictory in that I think you're right, there are those two wolves, but like taken to the most logical extension, they lead us to exactly contradictory places. So either we want tariffs because we want full protectionism and we want, everything made in America and we want completely domestic manufacturing, or on the other hand, we want to negotiate so we can lower trade barriers and have complete free trade and have the exact opposite of that. And so I think that's just what makes it difficult, because I think you're right. No matter what happens, I think Trump will try to declare victory and say everyone predicted
that is assured. Right. No matter what, Donald Trump will declare victory.
Tried to predict this chaos and then it didn't come. But that's only because really, no matter what happens at the end of this, the goal happened because either of those two goals have been floated by different members of the administration, and we don't actually know what the end goal is. So no matter if we have 30% tariffs on everyone or if we have 0% tariffs, it kind of leaves this opening for the Trump administration to say, this is exactly what we wanted. We did it. Promises made, promises kept. And which is why it's a very difficult policy to judge when there's so many different people telling us what the goal of the policy is. And then also, so it's just hard to judge it against itself of like, there was a clear metric of it. Because I think you're right. Obviously, there was always a chance that all these economists would make all these predictions and they'd end up being wrong. And that the goals that Trump wanted, the tariffs, would be achieved. But we can only say that if we know what the goals are, and we really don't. So I think that's just kind of the tough part about that, especially in a universe where he's even contradicting his own contradictory policy by constantly contradicting what he's actually doing with the tariffs and which sectors he's excluding, which he isn't, and there are exemptions and there aren't. And it's just like a really hard policy to judge with so much of that whiplash and so much of that back and forth.
Which this was Mark Caputo of Axios today, as we were recording this on Tuesday, saying that the sin of the discussion around the Customs and Border Patrol form that listed things that were not tariffed was just using the E word, exemptions. If that had not been said, he would not have sent all of the King's men out to the Sunday shows to say there are no exceptions and everything's going to get tariffed at a different rate, and we will see. And so that there's a lot of criticism on the Democrats right now for not having a stronger response, not having a coherent message, and much of it is warranted. And I have levied a lot of it on this show, but at the same time, it's hard to hit a blob like this that kind of keeps moving and shape-shifting. Like when you go and dunk on Howard Lutnick for saying that your children are going to be screwing in tiny little iPhone screws for their first job, you also have Scott Bessent saying that the new golden age of free trade is going to happen. And that's going out on the rapid response thing for Twitter. I do think that we're not out of the woods. And the two things that I think are really, really interesting to me in a short term, probably before the end of this 100 days, as we have, a couple, a dozen or so left, is do we see a beginning of a conversation with China? We have not seen that yet. And what do the deals start to look like with these 90-day pause countries? Because what I have heard from inside the Senate, this was before the 90-day pause, is that GOP Congress folk were being told by the administration, number one, there's no pause, which, all right. So number one, that didn't happen. But also the deals weren't just going to be about tariffs. The deals were going to be about buying American, and that even for small countries, there would be a good tariff rate put in, but also even if you don't buy American consumer goods or you don't have a society for American farm goods, you can buy a Boeing plane. You're not going to buy an Airbus. You're going to buy a Boeing. And I wonder what that looks like. I wonder what that looks like with countries like, I mean, Congress was also told these weren't going to happen with big countries or the EU, and certainly not China. Now Japan is sending people. So it's like, but I wonder what that looks like. If what we are going to see is a bunch of other deals that kind of look like the China deal from the first term, where there is a commitment to buy X amount of soybeans and pork belly and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I think that does speak to, I think, like you're saying, the kind of two reasons why Trump loves tariffs so much. I think there's a lot of conversation about how Trump has been talking about tariffs for decades, and, talking about trade deficits for decades, going back to, talking more about Japan than China in the 1980s. And all of that is true. And all of that is consistent, talking about reshoring domestic manufacturing, and all of that is true. But if you look at the actual record of how Trump used tariffs in the first term, and then even just so far in the second term, you're talking about, Canada and Mexico and other kind of brief tariffs that he's put in. That's the second term. Doesn't feel like he's mostly used tariffs to achieve trade outcomes. It's often been for immigration outcomes or for other sort of different policy. He clearly views this as, a stick to be able to use to get all sorts of different policy outcomes, way unrelated from trade, or anything kind of solely about kind of domestic manufacturing. And so that is what also just makes it a very unpredictable area, is while it's true that Trump is very ideologically consistently pro-tariff for one reason, also the way he's used tariffs have often been in very different reasons and to achieve very different outcomes, just because it is one of the few things that the president can kind of unilaterally impose on another country without negotiating any treaty, without Congress at all. He can kind of impose as a way to induce, whatever different, outcomes that he wants. And so, I certainly would not be surprised to see him do that again. And certainly every country is kind of racking their brain, I'm sure, to think of, clearly lately Trump has been very focused on rare earth minerals. I'm sure we're going to see countries, try to propose deals along those lines. So all sorts of looking at all the sorts of different areas that they know Trump is interested in and trying to get their tariffs lowered based on kind of those areas, even if it has nothing to do with, in the end of the day, more things being made in America or not.
And that's where ultimately I kind of landed last week when trying, because this is its own cottage industry, especially in our business, of Trump theory of mind. Yep. Who is he really when you cut beyond the bluster? Is he this brilliant 5D chess tactician who is 5 steps ahead of everybody? And, by the time that we land there, he has already foreseen it. Or is he this comically moronic Jar Jar Binks figure that is stepping on rake after rake after rake? And if he accidentally ends up in a good place, it is purely by happenstance. And where I've landed is he views himself, and I don't think this is incorrect, as more tolerant of uncertainty than anybody that he is going to be across the table from. And so if he upsets the apple cart and everything's on the floor and he's the only one that can authorize it being put back together again, then his view is, I don't know what the deals are going to be. I have no idea what the exact end is going to be. I just know that unplugging the world's economy and then betting, taking bids on, well, what do you give me to plug this back in, is, that he's going to get something. And the question is, what's the best deal that he wants to say, okay, we'll take it out on? And I think we saw part of his calculus of like, all right, I'm fine with the stock market tanking. I'm fine with everybody hating me. I'm fine with a bunch of tough talk from other countries. I'm not cool with the bond market. The second that the bond market went down, now, all right, I'll take the heat out of a hot kitchen a little
And I think that's exactly right. And I think, yeah, I mean, it's basically it's Richard Nixon's madman theory, which Trump has implemented in a lot of different areas, not just economic. It was what he tried to do with Kim Jong-un in the first term. Probably not a great idea to try to out madman Kim Jong-un, although it sort of worked in the first term in terms of, I mean, not that they ever got any sort of deal that they ever implemented, but certainly didn't lead to any bigger crisis. And so it's certainly, I think that is true of Trump's kind of view of things. The issue being, how many times can you run that playbook before people start to not believe you? And I think, which is why I think the last week has been a huge dent to Trump's credibility on this issue, because essentially, these countries kind of called his bluff to some degree and kind of did see, I think, like you said, more because the bond market than the stock market, he ultimately wasn't willing to kind of spark as much uncertainty and potential crisis as he kind of said he was. And so then, I mean, I think, we have this 90-day pause. I think we're in for like several more rounds of this, certainly in the next few months and then the next 4 years. And I just think the issue is, if again and again the kind of presiding takeaway from Trump imposing tariffs is that he puts them in and then all the people around him kind of get to him for actually kind of the worst can happen and that he always kind of pulls back in the end, then less and less, fewer and fewer countries are going to be likely to kind of look at him that way and think he's actually willing to kind of spark that uncertainty. Because for the most part, at crucial moments in the first and second terms, he's kind of pulled back from that whenever he's made it seem that way. And so the madman theory really only works if
But let me ask you this, because this is the one thing that I would say is interesting. If we just got to where we were right now, where there's a 10% tariff on the entire world, there is a hard tariff on automotives. We'll see what happens with semiconductors. There's apparently tariffs coming with pharma, but it's not the insane number that he said during Liberation Day when he had on the big board. Everybody breathed a sigh of relief when that was where we landed. If he had just announced that on Liberation Day, I think people would have freaked out. They would have screamed and yelled nearly as loud as they wound up doing with the higher numbers. So it's not like we are out of the woods. And this is where I would criticize the Democrats on this, because they have bought into the idea of the Trump blinked thing, as opposed to, no, Trump is still, there are still tariffs here. And either you're going to live or die by the Trump tariffs will ruin the economy argument.
I think it's two separate issues. I think in terms of the economic impact, I think, yes, you're absolutely right. It's important to note that the tariffs we're still at our highest effective tariff rate in 100 years, and the economic consequence of that will be almost as much. It'll be different diplomatic consequences because it's not like these varying kind of reciprocal tariffs with each country, but the economic consequences could be just as high. But in terms of the question of how countries will kind of receive the tariffs, I do think it's important. I think like economically, the tariffs that happen don't need to come in the context of the tariffs that came before, because they kind of stand on their own. But as far as other countries are kind of receiving Trump's willingness, they do very much come in the context of those previous tariffs, because they see that it was something of a climb down, and they see that kind of whatever's the most aggressive thing in Trump's mind, he's not really willing to do. So I just think it's two separate questions. I think you're absolutely right as far as like the economic point goes. But as far as kind of using the tariffs as a negotiating tactic, I do think this kind of hurts his ability to do that, because there was this higher bar that he clearly was not willing to cross. And then even at the lower bar, you're right, we'll see what happens with electronics and semiconductors. But it at least seemed like at one point in the last few days that even at the lower bar, the industries that would have been most impacted and caused the most political and economic pain with kind of the lower bar tariffs, even that pain he wasn't willing to kind of sustain, and he was going to kind of lower it. And now we'll see exactly where we land with those exemptions. But so I do think, as far as kind of the relations with other countries go, and as they're kind of watching him, that is still an important indicator, even if it's not actually relevant to, what is the actual economic consequences of the tariffs that we now have.
I'm not shocked, because nothing's shocking with the Trump administration, but I am surprised he didn't space it out more. I'm surprised it didn't happen later in the summer. Now, I guess the argument for it would be two things. Number one, if he wants to do promises made, promises kept, this was a day one promise. So he made it a day one promise. And that was that.
I think a lot of people were like on the edge of their seat waiting for him
to achieve. Right? Yeah.
The one he probably could have gotten away with not keeping.
The other argument is that if you're going to rock the American economy, better do it sooner rather than later. Because if you wait until later, now any kind of hiccup that happens, if it does happen, now puts you closer to the midterms where you're going to get wiped out. And they might still be, right? Nothing nothing is out of the woods yet. The 145% tariffs on China are not sustainable. Like that is, it's not sustainable for China. It's not sustainable for us. I do think that there's going to be we're going to be hearing more about my best friend Xi in the next 2 weeks than I suspect we have in the past. But I don't know. It's crazy. I still can't believe that we're in this that this has been as chaotic as it has been. Maybe that's it. Certainly from the Democratic side, it's the most chaotic 100 days. But also that, like, yeah, the tariffs weren't next to the tax cuts or something like that, because that represents a more holistic argument,
right,
for the Trump administration to say, like, yeah, look, your import costs are going to be higher, but deregulation is going to bring your operating costs lower, and the tax cuts are going to make it more profitable for you to operate. So you'll be able to absorb this, and ultimately the market forces are going to drive the prices anyway.
And there's Republican lawmakers that wanted him to wait, that wanted to not even have him do the tariffs unilaterally, but wanted it to be part of the reconciliation package. So just like I'm saying, to try to make the package more deficit neutral, try to make it more clear, okay, we're cutting taxes, but then we're also raising revenue. Though, of course, that admits that tariffs are in some ways a tax, which Republicans are loath to do. So that comes with its own complications. But I think, like as with everything, Trump was not willing to listen to Republican lawmakers, not willing to wait. And yeah, which is what is just the striking thing about these first 100 days, and no place more than the tariffs, is just how, I think you're right. If it ends up being very popular, it will be such an I told you so moment. And then if it ends up being unpopular, it will be entirely self-inflicted, because Trump, no matter what a lot of people think, was entering with a relatively, stable country and stable economy, and certainly a recovering economy and improving economy. And it would have been the easiest thing in the world, especially with kind of his communication skills and kind of messaging salesman tactics, to be able to just sell the economy even without doing much. And just sell it as doing well.
And he's had good economic indicators so far. Inflation it fell for the first time month over month in years. He's got a pretty favorable energy policy. So you've seen price of gas fall. So it's like, those are the things that matter. And that's the other question here. And to go from us pointy headed pundits to, the actual block of available voters. The question is, even if prices go up, do they go up on the things that people see that judge the economy on, right? Which is by and large groceries and gas.
Yep.
We have a lot of our groceries that are produced domestically, although Mexico and Canada are also factoring into that. And then gas is something that will be low. I mean, those were exempted from the tariffs, and that is going to be what it is. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting. Gabe, have you read any of these campaign books? Where you at on them?
I haven't actually. You've laughed me, so I haven't.
Okay. All right. I was curious if you've gotten to any of them.
I lived it. Wasn't that enough?
No. This is when the report cards come out. This is when everybody starts talking each other. This is when the now it can be told elements of the campaign, which I'll be done with Uncharted soon. I'll do my book report on the podcast for that. And then the only other big one is the Alex Thompson, Jake Tapper.
That one I'll read.
One about, although there's a lot in all the books about the Biden failing. Fight has a crazy one where, remember the Where's Jackie, the Jackie Walorski thing?
Oh, yeah.
So apparently Biden felt bad about doing that. So he invited Jackie Walorski's 90-year-old mother to the White House and then led her around on a meandering, like a literal, like blind leading the blind tour of the White House, where he was just telling staff to open rooms that were locked for reasons because they're not interesting. And Kevin McCarthy was along for the ride and was just like, he had no idea what was happening. But we'll see. We'll see whether or not there's more to be had there. Gabe, Wake Up to Politics is your excellent newsletter. Where can people find it?
wakeuptopolitics.com.
Just that easy. Thank you so much, buddy.
Thanks so much, Justin. Good talking with you.
And that'll wrap it up for us today. Politics, written and hosted by me, Justin Robert Young, for Dog and Pony Show Audio in Austin, Texas. We are edited by the great and powerful Mr. Will Saddleberg. Send me an email, theyoungamerican@gmail.com, about anything you'd wish. If you would like to support us with a one-time donation, it is paypal.me/payjury. Venmo is Justin-Young-20. Cash App is PX3 Cash, and you can send me anything you'd like in the mail. Post Office Box 153184, Austin, Texas 78715. Of course, you can always get our bonus content at TakePoliticsSeriously.com. That is where, for as low as $3 a week, if you'd buy me a cup of coffee once a week so I could sit in your car and talk to you about politics twice a week, well, then that's the deal for you. Head on over to Substack and find us at Take Politics Seriously, politics.com. $12 a month, $3 a week, pretty easy. And even cheaper than that if you go annual. $99 for 150 episodes of PX3. That's less than $1 an episode. Come on, baby. Let's go. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. But if you are truly about that life, if you really believe that independent political analysis matters, if you believe in the mission for me to leave my house and go to the various environs so I can see these things for myself, if you believe that I'm doing my best to explain this to you in a way that is the scoreboard and not the pep rally, well, you can get your name read at the end of the show. You can be part of the Titanic founding tier, including L3PO, Peepaw, Scott, Middle-Aged Mike, Tom, Sarah Jeannie, Jeremy, Pro Idiot, Chiller Tomatoes. Oh, yeah, it's Adam, Neil, AB Puppy, Dr. Whiskey, Michael, Fat Tony's PJs from New York, Will Porta, The Borge B, Matthew, Matt, Andrew, Edwin, Sam, Andrew, Phil, Edison, Devon, Paul, a dog named Checkers, Gloria, Jerry, Trucker, John, Berkeley, Stephen, Zombie Doc. You want to join them? The hollowed halls of the Titanic founding tier. One place to do it. TakePoliticsSeriously.com. We got the Money Man coming up next week. And possibly some surprises for you. Oh, and yeah, we're doing I think we're recording our terrible state party draft. I'm going to have to take a look at the calendar on that. But that's next week. Till then, hope you guys have a great weekend. Happy Easter holiday to you. Happy Good Friday. Happy Easter Sunday. Till next time, this is your old pal, Justin Robert Young, saying, some shows talk about politics, others talk about politics, and still more discuss politics. But this is the only show that dares discuss. Three.
Diamond Club hopes you have enjoyed this program.
Dog and Pony Show Audio.